the Benzinga Cannabis Capital Conference in Miami. Joining us today is Afzal Hasan from Origin House.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. First off, I would like you to start by introducing your company. Tell us a little bit about what you do. You touch on different aspects and parts of this industry, so please.
Yeah, absolutely. Origin House is a company that actually had its name changed 3-ish months ago. We used to be known as Canna Royalty. The company itself was founded about 4 years ago as a private company, originally focused on making investments into the US and also into high-value parts of the cannabis industry. Started off as a private company. We listed about 2 years ago on the Canadian Securities Exchange and also the OTC. And since that time, we started off as an investor, but about 1.5 years ago, focused on evolving our business model. So at that point, in November of 2017, we came out and made an announcement indicating that we were going to be transitioning from being an investor to an active operator. And the crux of our business is focusing on the development of brands. Our aspiration in the long term is to become a global house of brands in the cannabis industry. The way that we're going about it is relatively different from a lot of companies that are out there in the market. 3-phase strategy. Phase 1, become a leading distributor in the state of California, most active competitive market, most discerning customers, etc. Phase 2, accelerate and internalize the brands that we work with. So we're plowing resources and support services into the brands that we partner with in California. And our goal is to in-license their IP or acquire them over the long term. Step 3 of our business model is to take all those brands and the intellectual property that we're developing in California and spread it out into every other market across the globe.
So you mentioned brands. Can you tell us a little bit about your different brands, the ones in existence, the ones, in the works, about to come out?
Absolutely. So we sell for 34 brands at last count. 4 of those brands are wholly owned or licensed, and the other 30 of those brands are brands that we work with as a partner. We simply buy their products and resell them. There's a number of brands that I'm really excited and fascinated by. One of the brands that we were most excited by was a company called Flora Cal, which we ended up acquiring about 6 months to a year ago. Their craft exotic cannabis cultivation, and for me it was fascinating because of the fact that we started to see a brand emerge around flower based on its sales data. People were paying a pretty premium price on a very consistent timeline for that product. So for me, that kind of stuff really gets me excited, and that's the kind of data that we get access to as a distributor that we believe is going to give us an edge in the long term in terms of being a brand company.
So you have a few celebrity brands, right? Or
yeah, we work with I believe Cheech. I always get the names wrong.
Cheech and Chong.
Chong's Choice, I believe, is one of the ones that we've worked with. We've got a handful of other celebrity type deals in the works right now with companies that are coming out. So we're pretty excited about that.
Do you continue to believe? I mean, you made a bet earlier on, but do you continue to believe there is value in celebrity endorsed brands?
So it's an interesting question. I think there is a tremendous amount of value in the network and influence of celebrities, and that is unimpeachable. But they are influencers just like any other type of influencer as well. I wouldn't oversell it or undersell it. And I think especially in this stage right now where we're trying to get a lot of consumers that have some resistance to trying products, to try these products, having a celebrity can be a great way to have a trusted voice recommend a product to somebody. It may not be as impactful 10 years from now when people have less of that resistance, but today especially, I think when Cheech and Chong, they come out and they make a recommendation for a product, there's a part of the market that they may have been resistant, but they feel that trust because these are people that know what they're doing in a sense.
Definitely. So yesterday I published this story based on an interview I did with Shavo from System of a Down. The guy just released a cannabis brand of his own. And within an hour, I got a couple of emails asking me about the return on investment on these sorts of celebrity brands. How does this look in your experience? Is it worth the investment? Does it work, or is it more of a visibility and recognition?
We've definitely seen it play out in actual sales. Whether or not you're getting bang for buck is going to be determined until long term, but there is an appreciable impact when you have a real celebrity attached to a brand. Where it gets a little bit dicier is if you're talking about somebody that might not have true celebrity appeal or have a tremendous influence. At that point, your ROI might be lower or less tangible.
So you mentioned you were educated as a lawyer. Taking this into consideration, could you share some advice for cannabis entrepreneurs, cannabis businesses, from a legal perspective, things to do, things to avoid?
Absolutely. I mean, the legal perspective is quite interesting and evolutionary, and the main thing I tell you from the legal perspective is find a good lawyer, because you're going to need one in this industry. It's complicated to say the least, and you don't want to dot the wrong I or cross the wrong T. The practical advice that I provide, though, is a single message, which is focus. Focus on something and be something. Don't try and be everything. Don't try and be in every market. Don't try and have every type of product. Find something and do it well, because this is an active and competitive market, and chances are you're going to get outcompeted if you try and focus on way too many different things as opposed to a singular point where you're really good at it.
So this is something that advice I like to give when keynoting or whatever, and it's one of my favorite pieces of advice that I've heard over and over again from entrepreneurs and people who run cannabis businesses and businesses of all sorts. It's never too early to get a CPA and a lawyer. When do you think is the latest a startup can get a CPA and a lawyer? Is there such a thing as too early?
I think with CPA, you can really never go too early. Having that fundamental knowledge of your numbers and how it might evolve into the future is not just invaluable, but necessary for any business that wants to turn a profit into long term and not just be catching up. Lawyer, I think you can afford to have a fair amount of time that goes by before you engage with one, especially if you're involved in the soft work of planning for your market or market research or R&D, etc. You can get away with not consulting a lawyer at the early stages, but flip side of it is that they can, if used effectively and in very sparing amounts, at least provide you with some guidance at the early stages to make sure you don't make mistakes that you can unwind. And that's the tricky part, is that it's oftentimes hard to get a little bit of advice from lawyers, but there are great law firms out there that offer programs that are tailored to startups that offer that kind of a service. And so I think if you're able to find one of those, it's never too early, really.
In your experience, what are the largest legal pitfalls for cannabis companies?
Yeah, and the biggest issue that I find is overcomplicating structures. So you will see that regulations have been set up in every market that are different, and some of them have very onerous restrictions, and there is an entire industry of lawyers that has cropped up trying to create structures that circumvent the law. So when the law says you can't make a profit in California, which is what it used to say for 20 years.
Until a year ago.
These crazy collective structures and management companies and everything else. And the most unfortunate thing was when we kegged that whole system about a year ago and people tried to peel apart these collectives, they found that these documents were a living nightmare. In some cases, the way that these collectives work, you'd have a dispensary that signs up patients into its collective because that's how it works. Then they find out, after having onboarded 20,000 patients, that their collective document says in order to terminate the collective, you need the permission of every member of the collective. So 20,000 people in theory to wind that up. So it's that kind of stuff where when you try and do something too complicated as a lawyer, you're generally going to fail. And that is something that I would say with complete certainty. It is impossible to predict the future, and certainly not possible for somebody that's a one-man show, cobbling together documents and doing it on the budget to forecast what might happen in a legal relationship. So avoid complicated structures is probably the simplest and most basic but most valuable piece of advice I could give somebody.
I'm curious, why the name change, from Canna Royalty to Origin House?
Yeah, Canna Royalty was a contraction of our original private company name, which used to be Cannabis Royalties and Holdings Corp. So we started off as a royalty investment company. Over time, as I mentioned, we decided to move away from that passive investment philosophy into an active operator, and so our business dramatically changed. And so the roots of that name were in our old business model. We thought it'd be useful to have a name that reflected our current business model. The other aspect was that not everybody knew that our name came from the word royalty, and some people thought that we believed that we were the royalty of cannabis, and that also was just a perception that I wanted to get rid of as much as possible. So for those two reasons, we thought it'd be really helpful to have a new name that was more accurate and descriptive. And Origin House, the nice thing is that it is the shortest description of our business model that's possible. We are building a house to originate the cannabis brands of the future.
It's amazing. Any thoughts on being a publicly traded company 2 years into it? What are the main nuances of trading on a major stock exchange like the CSE?
Being a public company is an immense cost and frankly a nightmare that I wouldn't wish onto anybody but for the privileges that you get. So you do get the ability to raise capital in a relatively effortless way, and you need to weigh that advantage over the immense cost, both from a regulatory perspective, but also from a perception morale perspective too. So if you're out there paying your company's employees with a large portion of stock, and then the stock markets go like this, all of a sudden you've got an employee base that's there with glum faces all around, having done nothing wrong and having really not underperformed or anything. It's that kind of stuff, along with hundreds of other aspects that I could point you to about being a public company, that make it a tremendous challenge, and one that, again, I wouldn't try and wish upon anybody that's out there unless they believe that they truly have a business model that is primed for explosive growth using this public company model. And if you have one of those, then that cost benefit is huge for you. But this is my general advice for companies that were trying to go public as a lawyer too: don't.
Unless you need to.
99.9% of businesses have no need to be a public company. There's only a very specific few number of companies that reach either a certain size and scale and need liquidity. So that's one model where you're billions of dollars in size, then you need that. That's different from where we are in the cannabis industry. The other side of it is companies that have explosive growth trends and can leverage this constant financing and roll-up type of model that can benefit from it. Otherwise, vast majority of businesses are not suited for it. There's better ways to raise capital and get liquidity.
Last question relates to something you brought up a minute ago, employees holding stock. Would you recommend companies, either private or public, to include equity as part of employee compensation or not, and why?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've had many philosophical debates about this internally too. We hired a compensation consultant to really work through this, because the cannabis industry has taken the compensation practices of the technology sector, which involved handing out a lot of equity, and then turning it on its head and actually handed out more equity. And it's scary because of two things. Number one, if I have an employee coming in because all they want to do is get rich, then chances are I'm not going to be able to drive value out of them. They're really going to be looking at that as their MO. The moment the stock goes like that, they're out the door. Over and above that, it's a tool that is imperfect. Employees tend to value options as a zero value when you grant them, but when I issue an option that's at money on our books, you actually have to put on a Black-Scholes valuation that is huge. So for us right now, one option at a 10-year term, it goes onto our book at 75% of its exercise price. So an option for a $10 share goes on as a $7.5 cost, even though the employee values it as zero. It's those aspects of it that make it a tremendously imperfect tool. I think in certain types of management and leadership positions, it is critical to have that alignment. And over and above that, we are encouraging of having things like an employee share purchase plan or matching contributions for 401k or RSP, etc., that allow people to get exposure and feel like they're an owner. But trying to have too much of your compensation tied to stock, I think, is going to be a losing proposition, especially when you see volatility in the markets that can cause your business to lose morale without you even doing anything, which is the most painful place to be in.
That's very interesting. I think we're done here.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for joining us.
It was a pleasure chatting.
It was been great. Enjoy the rest of the event and maybe the nice weather.
Will do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.